So welcome everybody. My name is Alan Hurlbert. I'm a professor of biology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I am the founder of this project, Caterpillars Count. Started it in 2014. So let me go ahead. I'll just get back to sharing my screen. Just wanted you to see my face there for a moment. I'll just point out before we move forward that this link, this tiny URL link that's on the homepage, it has, if you want to just remember that, tinyurl.com/caterpillars webinar. It has the agenda, but it also has sort of quick, easy access to links to all of the things I'm going to be talking about today. Everything I talk about, all the resources, all the materials are on our project website, but sometimes you have to kind of explore around or find the right spot. So here they're organized in a fashion that hopefully is useful. So that might be useful to bookmark. Okay, so over the course of this webinar here today, I want to tell you a little bit about the project and why it exists in the first place, what the origin of it is, the kinds of things that we have been able to learn so far from Caterpillars Count, and what we hope to continue to learn moving forward. And perhaps most importantly, I just want to give people a sense of what it is like to participate in this project, like how much time and effort is involved, what sorts of situations or scenarios are a good fit for the project, and which ones might not be. So to start with sort of the big picture, it's no surprise probably to anyone in attendance here that the world's changing in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different ways that especially may be impacting natural ecosystems. So one thing that we talk a lot about is climate change, and in most parts of the globe that means warming, but it could also mean changes in the intensity of storms or the timing of precipitation or the degree of seasonality, those sorts of things. Urbanization is happening rapidly in many parts of the globe, and other forms of land use change. So whether that's deforestation for pasture use or other land uses, all of these things are impacting natural ecosystems. One of the groups that we're increasingly concerned about broadly are insects. And that's because insects really they play key roles in ecosystems. Of course, we recognize their roles as pollinators, as decomposers. Importantly, they're critical elements of complex food webs. So lots of different types of creatures depend on insects as an important source of food. And over the past several years now, there have been some alarming reports from various corners of the globe indicating that, hey, insects may be declining, and they may be declining at an alarming rate. And alarming enough to generate this New York Times Magazine headline 5 years ago, "The Insect Apocalypse is Here." Now, there are a number of studies that have gotten substantial sort of news headlines about declines. And so there was a study in Germany about flying insects over the past several decades. There's a study in Puerto Rico. So different parts of the globe, a particular set of researchers studying a particular group of insects perhaps found a pattern of decline. And again, there have been more and more of these that's just raising a little bit of eyebrows, and in some cases alarm bells. Now, there's a lot of heterogeneity in those reports and those studies though, right? As I mentioned, different places, they happen to be studying different insect groups. Those different places, of course, they occur on top of different backgrounds of degree of climate change or degree of pesticide use or land cover change, et cetera. So it's really hard to get a sense of how general these patterns are. to what degree these patterns of decline apply to all groups. And honestly, because there's so much variability in the types of methods used, et cetera, that's another obstacle. So it would be really helpful to have a standardized data set over a large geographic extent that measures things in the exact same way, that allows for this both comparability from place to place, but also this greater assessment of generality. Because another issue, imagine you're a researcher and you study grasshoppers for 20 years and you find, they're doing about the same as they've always been doing. That might be true wherever you chose to study them, but that type of result doesn't tend to get the headlines. So perhaps that sort of pattern is equally as common out there in nature, but there's kind of a bias in what sorts of results are getting reported, or at least that rise to our awareness. So again, by having a large-scale standardized monitoring program, we can sort of we're simultaneously aware of places where insects are declining, but also where they're holding steady, or even where they're maybe increasing. So insect declines are one potential impact of global change, but another impact has to do with the seasonal phenology or seasonality, this pattern or this timing of seasonal activity. And hopefully most parts of North America at this point look a lot more like this photo on the right. And if you're not there yet, then I'm imagining you're going to be there very soon. So as trees kind of every spring in these seasonal environments, as they leaf out, well, they're a tremendous resource for a large and diverse set of insect herbivores and even other insects that use that foliage as just a place to live or a place to hunt, etc. But caterpillars are sort of the classic leaf muncher, if you will. And so the seasonality of caterpillars is very much tied to the seasonality of the greening out of forests, right? So one potential impact you can imagine of warming is that under warming, if trees start leafing out a little bit earlier than they used to, if spring is coming out earlier, and in many places we know that is the case, then we expect that insects probably are coming out earlier as well. For the most part, these insects are all experiencing the exact same shifts in climate cues that the trees are experiencing, right? Although it's an open question, are insects actually shifting the same amount as trees in terms of shifting that activity earlier? So those are two different potential impacts of global change on insects. Are they leading to insect declines? To what extent are those declines uniform, or is it really variable from place to place? And then are insects really shifting the timing of their seasonal activity or their phenology? Now, this is the part in the webinar where I confess to you that I'm not an insect ecologist. Insects are not why I started this project. I'm actually a bird ecologist. And so I'm primarily thinking about these insects from the perspective of bird food. So imagine you're this indigo bunting, which is a beautiful neotropical migrant. It spends its winter down in Central America. And then in the spring, right around now, they are migrating northward into North America. And the whole reason that they're moving north during spring is because of all of that new green vegetation, which is newly hosting this tremendous food resource that the indigo bunting is able to take advantage of. In fact, it's relying on it in order to successfully raise its young. So imagine you're an indigo bunting and you're wintering down in Central America, but spring is coming earlier in North Carolina, where I am right now. And spring has been coming earlier. Well, wintering in Central America, you may not realize that, right? And so if you come to your breeding ground at the quote unquote normal time that's worked well for generations and generations before you. And yet spring on your breeding ground actually is advanced by a week or so. It could be that that seasonal peak of insect activity that you are kind of relying on to successfully raise your young has already started to drop off. And you might miss that peak if you're late enough. So that's a great concern from the perspective of bird ecology. And it's one of the fundamental questions we're interested in, is to the extent geographic variation in responses to climate change may be leading to this kind of mismatch between birds and their seasonal insect resources. Now, this cool animation that I just played for you, showing where on average indigo buntings occurred every week of the year, that animation, of course, is due to thousands upon thousands of citizen scientists, bird watchers who contribute their observations to the eBird project, right? And it's thanks to those volunteers and to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology for running this eBird project that we've been able to centralize all these observations and extract this really important and useful information from them. So we know with a really high degree of precision exactly when to expect a particular given bird species, when it typically arrives, when it departs, and how much that's changing from year to year. What we don't have or haven't had up to this point is an equally high resolution view of that insect bird food and the spatial timing of that. So that's really the impetus for this project, Caterpillars Count. And as I'll talk about throughout the webinar today, although it's called Caterpillars Count, really it is we're focused really on recording all arthropod bird food, insects, all kinds of insects and spiders we might come across. But caterpillars really do hold a special place as far as the importance in the diet of songbirds. A typical caterpillar is just a soft, juicy bag of protein, really easy to convert that into the growth of chick biomass, compared, if you imagine, to like the hard casing enclosed beetle or spider or something like that. But in any case, the project is called Caterpillars Count, and it revolves around conducting these surveys on woody vegetation. So not your garden plants, but usually native vegetation, trees and shrubs in wooded areas or adjacent to woody areas, etc. We'll talk through, our free mobile app, various resources we have for training you in the ability to identify things, basically to the level of arthropod order, beetle versus caterpillar versus fly, that sort of thing. We have some integration with our mobile app and iNaturalist I'll talk about. We have a bunch of tools for visualizing data that you submit yourself, data that anyone submits to the project from anywhere. So I'll talk through some of those. I think this project is especially well suited to nature centers, groups, master naturalists, zoos, school groups, for reasons I'll get into. But certainly we have plenty of people who are just individuals who have a really cool wooded backyard and they want to have a better sense of the biodiversity back there and contribute meaningful data about population trends for insects in their backyard. So certainly we do have individuals participating as well. We have a number of learning activities and resources on our website. So today we're going to talk about all of this stuff. I should mention right now, as par for the course for these webinars, but as you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. I will try to make sure I check that every once in a while. And if I don't get to your question, then you can feel free to unmute and verbalize it. And we should have time at the end for more Q&A as well. Okay, as of the end of 2022, caterpillars count was being done in 32 states and provinces across North America, plus a couple of sites that were started outside of North America. And I hope that there's continued adoption outside of North America. It really can be done anywhere in the world that there's woody vegetation, trees or shrubs. So that's a lot of places. But up to this point, we have over 180 sites. Over 1,700 people have submitted data. Far more than that have actually participated, but we may not know about their precise identity. We've surveyed over 80,000 branches and recorded over 200,000 arthropods. So I hope that we are continuing to grow. If anybody on this webinar is from either Illinois or Alabama, we have these gaping holes in our map we would love to fill for sure. So let me start by giving you a sense of some of the things we've learned already. And of course, anytime you start a citizen science project where the goal is not simply, education and exposure to environmental science concepts, but actually generating useful scientific data, you need to confirm that the data provided by participants actually is valuable, right? So that was one of the first things we did several years ago. We published in this paper. So the first thing we checked at one of the sites in central North Carolina that myself and my team visited weekly throughout the summer. At that same site, a set of citizen scientists who I never even met also were visiting that same site, surveying the same branches over the same summer. And, we were never there on the same day, but we were trying to get a sense of, what bugs were there. And so here you can see the, by the relative size of these different colored blocks here, that in general, we got pretty similar estimates of the biodiversity that was present there, a lot of similarity. Not just in the relative proportion overall, but even at the scale of individual branches. So this middle graph is showing the estimated density, that is the number of bugs per survey branch. Estimated on the x-axis, it's by the trained scientist group, and the value on the y-axis is the estimated density by citizen scientists. And the different colors correspond to these same colors of different types of critters. And you can see on the whole, although there's variation in general, but in general, all these points kind of lie along the one-to-one line. That is, the groups that trained scientists found to be have the highest density, citizen scientists also found to have the highest density, etc. And that was true regardless of these two different survey methods, which I'll talk more about later on. And then finally, this graph on the right is a representation of the seasonal activity of caterpillars, caterpillar phenology. The black line is the estimate from trained scientists. The gray line are the citizen scientists, and they both capture this sort of increase in caterpillar occurrence through early June, a peak in sort of mid to late June, and then a decrease. The trained scientists had an extra survey day. There's no data point for the gray line here. So we felt very good about the general correspondence about the seasonal trends between trained scientists and citizen scientists across all these different types of measures. Something else we've learned so far from our now, 8 years of data collection is that host plant species matters a lot for what kinds of bugs might be found. And so this is an example from one of our sites. This is the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And across the bottom, you can see these different plant species that we have survey branches for at the Botanical Garden. And then we have, again, the height of each of these blocks is a estimate of survey density for that particular type of bug. And so first of all, you can see overall, we have the most bugs on black gum and American beech and this buckeye species. But if we were particularly interested in caterpillars, for example, which is this magenta color here, then it looks like red oak was better than all of the other species, etc. So depending on the arthropod group, different plant species might be better than others. And of course, many of you may be familiar with the idea that on average, native plants tend to support far more arthropods than alien plant species or non-native plant species. That certainly tends to be the case. I just had an undergraduate kind of test that within our data set, and she finds that generally is true. But here you can see that even within native species, there's a tremendous amount of variation. This is another type of information that we're especially interested in assessing with caterpillars count data. And the challenge here, of course, in assessing long-term trends is that it requires long-term monitoring. It means not just participating one time, but ideally people set up a caterpillars count site and they continue to monitor that year after year so that we can evaluate trends like this. And this is data from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. I'll show you how to create a graph like this on our website, but basically you can see for these 4 different arthropod groups, caterpillars, grasshoppers, and crickets, leafhoppers, and also true bugs, that they all seem to be declining at one of our flagship sites over the past 8 years or so. Is this general? Are arthropods increasing in some other places? Again, that's what pooling all of this data together into one data set allows us to better understand. Okay, so let me explain a little bit more, give you a little bit more flavor for what it looks like to actually participate in a project. I've kind of alluded to the existence of survey branches. I've mentioned that there's a site. So a site, when you set up a caterpillars count site, you are going to determine in advance how many survey branches you want your site to have. That's a flexible number. It's up to you. It can be anything from 10 or any multiple of 5 that's greater than 10. As you decide how many survey branches to set up, you're going to want to have a sense of, well, okay, how much work is it? How much time is it? And I would say the ballpark to budget for this decision is, let's just say 5 minutes per survey branch, right? If you say 5 minutes per survey branch, then if you were to set up a site with 30 survey branches or survey trees, as it says here, I'll say tree or branch kind of interchangeably, because typically on any one tree, there's just going to be one branch that we focus on. 30 trees times 5 minutes, that's 2.5 person hours. Now, there are people, and I've already alluded to the fact that we have people who have set up sites and they're just very dedicated biodiversity enthusiasts who really want to have a good detailed sense of the biodiversity in their backyard and how it's changing over time, etc. And there might well be, maybe some people on this call are potentially interested in spending 2.5 hours, maybe even on a weekly basis, on this project where they themselves are surveying 30 trees. That's great, but that we don't expect to be the norm. We don't expect any average person to spend 2.5 hours in a day on this project. But this work is very easily shared, right? Divide and conquer. If you happen to have a group of 5 people who all meet up and say, hey, let's go do some caterpillars count surveys together, then they can knock off 30 survey trees in half an hour, right? And so that's a much smaller time commitment. So that's one of the reasons that we think that this project works especially well at nature centers and zoos or with school groups, is because you have a set of people often that you can kind of have them work together to kind of divide up the labor a little bit. It also says on here weekly monitoring from May to July. That is another suggested or recommended level of participation, but anyone, setting up a site doesn't require permission. I'll show you how to do that in just one moment. You can create a site with 10 survey branches, and you can just do those survey branches once, ever, and that's it. And that's your participation. That's totally fine. So this weekly monitoring from May to July, if you choose to participate with that weekly frequency or bi-weekly frequency, something like that, then those data can potentially be used to get at some of those questions about seasonality and, how is seasonality in Georgia versus Massachusetts, and is it changing from this year to that year, et cetera, et cetera. And we can relate that seasonality to the timing of bird migration and the timing of bird reproduction. But if you don't collect data with that frequency, but you have fun doing it, maybe you just want to do it once per year, for example, that's great. Something I'll say repeatedly throughout this webinar is that you are encouraged to participate at whatever level makes sense for you. And again, that could be a small number of survey branches. It could be a low frequency of monitoring. Whatever makes it worthwhile for you to participate, we're happy for you to participate at that level. For the people that participate with greater frequency and with a greater number of survey branches, the data from those sites will probably end up getting used for more scientific purposes and to answer a broader variety of scientific questions. But even that lowest level of participation contributes valuable information, especially about what different tree species are able to support in terms of arthropods. I didn't actually justify, I think it probably makes obvious sense how surveying weekly is going to give you a much finer resolution picture of seasonality and seasonal variation. I haven't really justified this 30 survey tree or survey branch suggestion. And that comes from one of our sites where we actually have 60 survey branches. And indeed, there are other sites that have set up 80 or even 100 survey branches, presumably because they have a large number of people to kind of divide that work up among. But what we did at our site, where we have 60 survey branches, is we did kind of a subsampling exercise where we pretended, out of the 60 branches surveyed, let's just pick 10 at random. Let's pretend that those were the only ones we surveyed. And a second time, let's pretend that we surveyed 20. So we'll subsample 20. So we subsampled just 10 or 20 or 30 or 40, all the way up to 60. And what we found is that with 30 survey branches worth of data, we got pretty similar patterns. We were able to get reasonable estimates that approximated what we got with the full 60 survey branches. But once we got below 30, 20, or only 10 branches, the error bars on those estimates just ended up being a little bit bigger, and so just less precise data. And that makes total sense. If you've spent any time looking for bugs in nature, you know that they're kind of patchily distributed, right? You might look at a bunch of plants and not see much of anything, and then on that 10th branch, you find all sorts of things. And so because bugs are patchily distributed, the more branches you can look at, the better. The more precise those estimates will be. But of course, no one has infinite time to devote to this. So given that, that's where this recommendation comes from. And so especially if you have participants, a group of participants to divide up the labor, this is sort of a recommendation. On the other hand, if you're just doing this in your backyard, feel free to just set up 10 survey branches. And that will still take you, at 5 minutes per survey, that still will take you less than an hour, 50 minutes or something like that for one person to do on their own. And that's totally fine. And again, the frequency with which you do it, you're doing it to the extent that you participate, you're doing it because you're getting something out of it, or to the extent that you're interested in contributing to answering certain questions. So participate at whatever level makes sense for you. So on this page, it says spatial layout is flexible. I haven't really talked about spatial layout of survey branches, but what you've seen in this cartoon is that every one of these circles is meant to represent a survey branch on a different tree, and they're in these groups of 5. So there's this word, 2 circles. A circle, actually, this is probably confusing. A circle really refers to a group of 5 branches. So on this image here, we have 6 different survey circles. Each circle has 5 circle icons. That, I realize, is the confusing part of my terminology and graphic here. The idea is, if you have lots of vegetation to choose from, like you're in a very wooded area, and there's all kinds of branches at eye level that you would be able to assess, then what we want you to do is first generally identify the broad area overall that you want to characterize arthropods from, and kind of distribute. And this can be somewhat subjective, like, okay, well, here's an area that has a bunch of vegetation. I'm going to put one group of 5 survey branches over here. And you can kind of choose a tree in the middle and say, okay, that's going to be the center of one of my circles. And there's an area with lots of branches over here. I'm going to choose that one in the middle to be the center of that group. And so these red survey branches in this graphic are kind of chosen subjectively based on where you see, okay, there's a bunch of vegetation over there I could choose from. Then the satellite branches around that central branch, if you have lots of branches to choose from, should be basically just, okay, I'm going to walk 5 meters in each of the 4 cardinal directions, and then just choose the first branch I come to after 5 meters. And so that allows for sort of a more systematic or standardized selection of survey trees, which we hope will provide to ensure that you're basically getting a representative set of vegetation in the area. Now, if you're in your backyard, or even if you're not in your backyard, but in some natural areas or some parks, maybe the woody vegetation you have is all along a forest edge between a meadow and a forest or something like that, or your survey branches are all along a trail. It may be that you don't actually have a lot of trees to choose from. You barely have enough trees at eye level that you can survey. You can't make them fit this perfect little schematic. That's totally fine if you can't. So if they end up all just being arrayed, each of the 5 branches in a group are just arrayed in a line of 5 branches along a trail or something like that, that's totally fine. It's more when you have the vegetation and the foliage to choose from, try to arrange them sort of systematically like that. But if you don't, then just use whatever branches are available. And here's an example. I've mentioned the North Carolina Botanical Garden, which is here in Chapel Hill. There's, of course, the standard display garden part, but that's not where we're doing our surveys, right? We're focused on, there's a wooded area with a stream and trails and plenty of beech and maple back here. And there's this nice yellow trail along which we have arrayed 8 different groups, 8 different survey circles. Each circle includes 5 survey branches. And so our group of researchers kind of spends an hour or 2 just walking this loop and surveying all the branches as we go. So that's one example where we have 40 survey branches at a site. And we conduct surveys. We actually haven't started yet, but we're going to start in the next couple weeks, and we'll go through the end of July. But you're able to do surveys as soon as there are leaves on the branches. You can do a survey. And you can survey until the leaves fall off the tree. And we have some sites like Acadia National Park in Maine and some sites in the Boston area that very much go into the early fall. Again, there's no requirement about this timing or the frequency. It really is survey as frequently as you find interesting. And for whatever the data resolution you want to generate for your site. Okay, let me actually, well, so this is what the website looks like. If anyone here could actually create a site in 2 minutes, without, you don't need permission. You go to our website, caterpillarscount.unc.edu. It does require that you have created an account, but again, that just takes a quick minute and an email verification. Once you have an account, you go to our website and you click on My Account. You've logged in, you click on My Account, there's a Create New Site button, and this is all the information you need. Most importantly, you need to name your site. Now, if you happen to be a nature center or environmental education center, et cetera, of course, you can just use that. You can put the URL for that in there if you like. If you are doing this in your own backyard, then my recommendation is that you just get creative. The main thing is you want to come up with something unique. If I'm doing it in my backyard, I don't want to just call my site Alan's Backyard. There could very well be, hopefully there are many other Alans across North America who are considering doing Caterpillar's Count. So, make it, the name, your dog's backyard castle, whatever, just get creative, etc. You can provide a brief description of your site, maybe saying it's a backyard or saying it's oak hickory forest, et cetera, et cetera. It's a natural area with X number of acres, et cetera. Just a sentence or two description. You'll zoom in as far as you can on the map to describe the central location of your site. And then you have to decide how many plants or survey branches are you going to set up for your site. I mentioned the minimum is 10, and then you can do any multiple of 5 greater than 10. Again, you'll have to think through that in advance, like what makes sense? How many people are going to be doing this? How much time do we want to devote to this? And choose your number. And then the last piece of information to include is a site password. And this is a password. This is not the password for your personal account when you create your personal account. This is a password that will be shared. So if you're creating a site, if you're doing this at a nature center, you're probably hoping that other people come and help submit data, right? So when those other people come, you will let them know, hey, welcome to our nature center for this Caterpillar's Count activity. The site password for our site is our nature center name or whatever it is, something easy to share with the participants. But it's basically just a minor little obstacle or roadblock to prevent random hackers from spamming and submitting all kinds of fake data to our database, right? If you have heard about the project, then you've heard about the site password for this particular site, and you have to enter that in the app, as I'll show you later on. You can always change your site password later if you decide to, but that's it. It's as easy as that for creating a new site. I see there's a question in the chat. For trees that flower prior to leaf out, is that data also valuable or only survey after leaf out? Oh, that's a great question. Only survey after leaf out. So this is very much a foliage arthropod monitoring project. And the kinds of things, certainly there are arthropods that will visit flowers for some of those trees that flower before they leaf out. And certainly some of those arthropods actually may even be of importance for bird food. But as you'll see in a moment, our method of recording survey effort, et cetera, is focused all around leaves and number of leaves and the length of leaves, et cetera. So we do not survey when there's only flowers. Okay. Let me give you a sense a little bit more about what the survey process itself looks like. And there are actually 2 different methods, a visual survey and a beat sheet survey, and each one has its pros and cons. I'm just going to stop sharing actually and give you a more visual sense. Look at this. Oh, I got to turn off my background fuzziness here. There we go. So you can see I have this fake plant next to me. from which I'm hanging a tag with a unique 3-letter code on it. It's maybe upside down. BYT is the code. So I'll show you in a little bit later on. But basically, when you create a site and you say, I want 20 survey branches, our website automatically generates 20 unique 3-letter codes for you that, yeah, each one is unique to that specific branch you're gonna put it on. So the first survey method is a visual survey. A visual survey, this is a method that was actually pioneered by avian ecologists in the early 1970s for quickly monitoring bird food in an area. The idea is you're going to examine an area of branch of exactly 50 leaves, 50 leaves and their associated twigs and petioles. And of course, a visual survey to record bugs is going to require some very careful examination, leaf by leaf, of both the upper surface and lower surface of every leaf. You're going to want to, oh, look at this. There's a little fake Sharpie drawn bug on the bottom of that one. So the leaves, the petioles, and the twigs and branches associated with that area of 50 leaves. And of course, you don't want to like really, be rough and knock this branch around as you're doing your survey, because you might knock some things off or disturb some things. So you're going to have to be kind of go slow and carefully. And what happens to me as I'm doing these surveys, often I'm trying to start my leaf count, like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, cool bug. And then I get all excited and I'm paying attention to the bug and I submit it with the app, which I'll show you in a moment. And I've submitted it, and then I got to go back to my survey, but I've completely lost track of what leaf count I was on. So one thing I often will do is I'll actually count out the area of branch that corresponds to a 50-leaf area in advance before I even worry about the bugs. And I'll kind of count, hopefully there's kind of some visual landmark. I'll be like, oh yeah, well, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 50, and I'll say, oh, that 50 takes me up to this fork in this branch. So I can just, from now on, I don't have to worry about counting the leaves. I can just remember that point on the branch. And then I can just focus on looking for cool bugs. And now these bugs, of course, have undergone millions of years of evolution to not be easily detected by visual predators, right? So this takes a little bit of practice. It's maybe one of the trade-offs or the cons of the visual survey methodology, is it really requires patience and care and attention to detail. So if you are considering doing this project with, let's say, student groups like high school or even middle schoolers, and honestly, I wouldn't even consider doing this project with elementary schoolers, with a focus on submitting data. You can certainly go through the motions with elementary schoolers and look for bugs with them using our methods, but I would appreciate not actually getting data for middle schoolers, honestly. Middle schoolers, I'm sorry, elementary schoolers is what I meant to say. Middle schoolers I could see, but do I trust a middle schooler to count out exactly 50 leaves and to not miss anything on that branch? Less so. So also, if you're at a nature center and you're doing this where there's a mixed group of parents or adult parents and kids, the other method, the beat sheet method, which I'll show you in a moment, might be a better option. But well, actually, let's just go straight to that to give you that sense. So here is a homemade beat sheet. So I have instructions you can buy an official beat sheet from like an entomological supply company. I don't know how much money they are, probably $20 or $30. You can make this just with, an old sheet. And this is just like cheap pine molding you can buy in 10-foot lengths at Lowe's or Home Depot. And buy one 10-foot length, cut it into 4 equal pieces, and then you can make 2 beat sheets out of it. So the materials here is like $5. Nevertheless, it is there is some material cost if you decide to go with the beat sheet route. A little bit of time in making them, and then perhaps potentially more of an obstacle if you have a large group of people or volunteers who are going to be doing the surveys. In some scenarios, there can be complicated logistics to getting them the beat sheets and making sure they return the beat sheets so that the next group or whatever can access them, etc. But if you elect to do a beat sheet, the whole idea is that you hold that beat sheet under your survey branch. You get some kind of stick like this, and you whack the branch exactly 10 times. And whacking it strongly enough to dislodge arthropods onto your beat sheet, but not so hard that you're damaging the branch and breaking leaves off. And then it becomes much easier to spot things that have fallen off onto this white background, right? So this is why I say, you know, the pros of the beat sheet are you don't have to be as detail, you know, oriented and paying as careful attention and not missing cryptically patterned or colored bugs on a branch. They're very easy to spot. It takes less time. Whack, 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 whack. Oh, there's my answer. Here's what I have. I just have to enter it now. And also, it's much easier to share your like what you found on the branch. Like if I whacked a branch and all this stuff fell out on it, I can now kind of show it around. Like I can, hey, people, you know, see this over here? You guys see this over here? I can kind of show it around to different people. And again, if kids are involved, certainly kids love whacking branches and seeing what falls out. So we have these two methods. Let's see. After you have done with a visual survey, the protocol is to examine exactly 50 leaves. With a beat sheet survey, you're holding this under a branch and you're whacking the branch, and you're trying to get as many leaves as possible hovering over your beat sheet. But then after you've done the survey, you need to go back, maybe hold your beat sheet back up where you held it before, and now count how many leaves were over this beat sheet. And I'm going to record that number as my level of effort. Here's how much branch I've surveyed with that whack. To the nearest 5 or 10 leaves is fine. It does not have to be a perfect estimate. It's not meant to just be something you agonize over. And again, like when I visually look at a branch, I just kind of visually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 79, 20, 22, 29, 30, 31, 44, 45, 65, right? That's plenty accurate for that assessment. And then the last thing you'll do is kind of assess the extent to which the leaves appear really chomped, which I'll show you in a moment. So you have this choice when you set up a site. So the important thing really, and what we've tested or compared data collected from beat sheets and collected from visual surveys. And on average, it's pretty similar, actually. There are some trade-offs to each one in terms of what kinds of bugs you might be more or less likely to record. As long as we know which type of method you're using, then we can take that into account. But the important thing is that you think about what method makes the most sense for your site and your participant base, and then just choose that method and stick with that method. And you know, we don't mind which one you choose. As I mentioned before, there are instructions linked on our website for how to make a simple beat sheet, but it's pretty straightforward. Okay, any questions about the mechanics of conducting a survey? I'm going to go back. We're going to keep talking about it because I'm going to show you what it actually looks like from our website. So here's our website I mentioned before. If you go to participate, submit observations. Now we have a free mobile app. If you like, we prefer people use the mobile app, honestly. And there's even an offline mode so that you can still use it when you don't have Wi-Fi, if you don't have Wi-Fi at your site. That said, we also have paper data sheets. You can print out paper data sheets and then submit that data through this web form later on if you like, if you prefer. This web form is basically what the app looks like, except it's all stretched wide on the web. But you know, if you picture this form sort of on a phone screen, that's what it looks like. So basically, there's I showed you every branch has a unique 3-letter code. So you punch in that 3-letter code, and automatically it populates and says, "Oh, are you at this?" In this case, this is a test branch. So this is example site, circle 1, American Beach. It's even showing this color red, which is going to be the color on that particular tag. The colors have different tags, as I'll show you in a moment. It auto-populates with a time and date. I say whether I'm doing a visual or beat sheet survey. I can optionally enter in like, oh man, it was a big storm last night, or you know, something if I think maybe it's relevant. I can click a little check mark. Let's say it just rained and the leaves are still wet. That's something we might expect to influence how many bugs are out on the leaves. Then the question is, did we find any arthropods? If I did find some, then I'm asked to identify what I saw at this level. So as I said before, these are mostly at the level of order. And these groups, we feel that people can learn to identify them. Some of them, people are already going to have a very good feel for. Ants, caterpillars, spiders. I think people generally have a good feel for those groups. The difference between a beetle and a leafhopper and a true bug, some people might need to learn. I'll show you some of the resources we have for doing that. But once you select an arthropod type, let's say caterpillars, for all arthropod types, you then report how long it was. It's head plus body length, so not including the skinny legs and antennae, things like that. The part that makes up the food, really. So maybe I saw a 25-millimeter caterpillar. Maybe there were 2 of them. I can say how many I saw. With some arthropod groups, there are some extra checkboxes. So with caterpillars, we ask, oh, was it hairy? Or was it in a silk tent or rolled up in a leaf? We can check one of those boxes if that's true. We optionally have the ability to take a photo. Since I'm on the web version, it's only going to look for a photo file that I can upload. But if I'm on the mobile app, then it'll access your camera and you can take a photo. And in fact, we highly encourage people to take photos, especially of caterpillars, but anything cool and unusual that you find, take a photo. You can do that with the app. And then, okay, so I saved that caterpillar and it says, oh, there's 4 hairy rolled caterpillars. Oh, there's also some ants. There was a 3-millimeter ant. And maybe there was also a larger ant. So if there's an ant of a different size, I'm going to want to enter that as a separate entry, right? Whereas if I have multiple 3-millimeter ants, I can just increase that number. But the 10-millimeter ant needs a separate entry. And okay, if that's all the bugs that I saw on my survey branch, I'm good to go. Continue. And because I entered that 3-letter code, it already knows I'm on American Beach. I can't even mess with that. I'll show you where that information gets entered later on. But I do need to enter the average leaf length. And because I said visual survey, this is set at 50. I can't edit that 50. But if you had done a beat sheet survey, this would be editable and it would be expecting you to tell it. How many leaves were over your beat sheet when you whacked it? And how long is the average leaf? And what was the average level of herbivory? So again, you might actually do a survey on a branch and find no bugs, but your leaves all look like this. They all have holes, evidence that there was some chewing done in the past, right? So you're asked to kind of estimate, based on these categories, what level of herbivory was there. And really, the way to think about this is if you just did a 50-leaf survey, a visual survey, well, 5% of 50 is 2.5. So if in your mind, you can take all the leaf holes, you look across that branch you just looked at, and you mush all the leaf holes together mentally, were there more than 2.5 leaves worth of hole? And if so, that puts you in the next category, greater than trace. That would put you in light. If there were more than 5 leaves worth of holes, when you mush them together visually, that would put you above light and into moderate, etc. Okay, so that's one way to think about that. I would say early in the season, often you're going to have basically none or trace. Later in the season, most branches are trace, and then occasionally you'll come across a light or moderate, or every once in a while, like really heavy defoliation like that. And then you can click finish. Oops, I forgot to enter this leaf length here. So let's say my leaf length was 12 centimeters. Oops, I didn't select the herbivory. There we go. That's helpfully reminding me. Now I can hit finish, and that data just got submitted. So that's what that survey process looks like with the mobile app. Let's see. Someone asked, wait, hold on. There's a couple questions in the chat. So let me see if I can read that. How to get the branch survey codes. That's a great question. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. And then, are there tips, tricks to getting them to hold still enough for measurement? There are not. Some bugs are constantly on the move, and some bugs are going to be much easier. A caterpillar, right? Just going to be sitting there, or if it's moving, it's going to be very slow. Excuse me. Yeah, you have to do your best, and the same goes for snapping a photo. Some bugs are going to be really hard to get a good photo of. Other bugs are going to get a great photo. So yeah, you're kind of gonna you got to just do your best with things that are moving around. You can have a small ruler with you and kind of try to hold it close to the bug as it's moving and just visually try to estimate. But we understand that there's some error associated with those estimates, and that's fine. I just realized, wait, am I sharing my screen right now? I am sharing my screen. Good. Sometimes I talk as if I'm sharing my screen, but no one knows what I'm talking about. But let's answer that other question in the chat, because that's something actually I meant to get to before. Once you have created a site, so here's the My Account tab. This is where you'll create your own account, create a Caterpillar's account in the first place. Once you've done that and you log in, you'll see all these options. Create new site. Once you've created the site, you can manage it. So when you click Manage My Site, you will see a drop down here, which just says your site. I'm the whole project admin, so I see all sites ever. But let's just click on Acadia National Park here as an example. And so this, for you, it'll be simple. You'll have one line here and you'll just have one option. But so here are the 4 options for managing your site. And the first one actually I'll mention is just, you can edit the information you put in when you first created it. Like, oh, did I have a link or not? Do I want to modify the description of it? Looks like this got cut off. Oh, I didn't realize we have a 140 character limit on that. You can change your site password if you want to. And then these 2 checkboxes, the default is that your site is public. But let's say in that way, there's a page on our website where if someone says, oh, I want to find a Caterpillar's Count site near me, your site will be listed listed there if the site's public. If it's not public, it won't be listed there. So if this is just your backyard, then you might not want it to be listed, for example. The only information, of course, it shows a pin on the map, and it has an email contact information if someone's interested in participating. So that you can turn that off by unclicking that. And then, of course, if you try this out for a year or 2 and then you decide, oh, you're no longer going to participate, if you know that you're no longer going to participate, you can come in here and unclick that. But if you don't, that's fine. Let me walk through these other options for managing the site. Then I'll get to these questions in the chat here. So let me go back to Acadia. So the first question was, where do we get these tags in these 3-letter codes? So as soon as you create a site, you can come in here to edit survey plants. And Acadia National Park has 20 survey branches. They have 2 different sites at Acadia National Park, and each site has 20 survey branches, which means four of these survey circles. When you click on a circle, you see 5 different unique 3-letter codes. Now, when the first time you create a site, you're going to have your survey branches grouped in these however many circles you set up. And of course, the plant species is going to be blank because we don't know. We can't see into the future which branches you're going to pick. So what you're going to do, let's say you choose 30 survey branches, you create a site with 30 survey branches. Your next step is to wander around your area and select the actual branches, and then identify those tree or shrub species if you can. And so this is something you can do with the mobile app. So this Manage My Sites tool that we're in is available with the mobile app. So you can wander around with your phone and call up, oh, this is going to be circle 1. This red branch, that's going to be my central branch in the circle. Oh, this American mountain ash would be great. Let's have that be this one, and I can type that in. And then so you fill those out as you do. And you can step through all of your survey branches and kind of fill in that information. Once you have figured out which branches you're going to use and what species they are, and you can, of course, leave the species blank for now if you're not a botanical expert, and fill it in later on when you get a friend who has that information, who has that ability. You can definitely fill it in later. But once you've filled it in, that's what allows you to go to this print tags feature. And here you can see we've generated this PDF with your unique branch codes. And it says, where that branch code pertains to. Here's the site. Here's this particular circle or group of survey branches, and the species that you entered. Now, again, if you aren't able to enter the species names first, you can certainly leave it blank. They'll just be blank on the tag, right? And you can still hang these tags on your branches and plan to enter that species information later on. But your data certainly becomes much more valuable if you can eventually tell us what those tree species that you were surveying are. So you can print this out. If you print it double-sided, then the backside is just a little QR code. So again, if you're at a nature center or a zoo or something, you just have some branches where people can both learn how to identify tree species, but they can also find out about the project by scanning this QR code. So I didn't say it explicitly, but so every group of 5, of course, has these 5 different colors. So again, when you enter BQC in the app, it's going to show a blue border on the app so that you can double check that you didn't, have a typo and enter BQD by accident. You can confirm, oh yeah, I'm at the blue survey branch, and you can check all the information. Okay, the last tool in this Manage My Sites area is this Oversee Managers button. So maybe you decide to create a Caterpillars Count site, but you're in a nature center and you want some other workers at the nature center to also be able to, edit the plant species information, or to maybe do some QA QC on the data, edit the survey data, or set the site password, etc. You can add as many site managers as you want. They just need to have created a Caterpillars Count account. And once they've done that, you can just put their email in here and hit plus, and they'll now have sort of administrative ability to print tags and edit the survey plants and that sort of thing. Okay, so those are all the Manage My Site tools. So let me take a look here at some of these questions. Cheesecloth. Oh, for a beet sheet, you can use cheesecloth in place of the sheet. You can use any material, and of course we recommend a light colored material. But so the thing with cheesecloth is that if you're surveying after a recent rain or when there's dew in the morning, once cheesecloth gets wet, it gets pretty heavy. So that would be one reason to prefer kind of lightweight sheet material. But whatever works for you. I mean, the most important thing is the area. And again, we have instructions. Those sheets we have are just like 2 feet by 2 feet. So that cheesecloth could also potentially get snap. It might not last as long because stuff gets caught in it when you set it down and things like that. I can imagine it would be a pain. The other question, say again where you go to set up your account originally. So on the website, so if I log out, then there's going to be a sign in, I guess sign in, and then there's a create new account button. So that's as simple as, and you can also do it on the mobile app as well. You can create your account on the mobile app. So that's where to find that. Isn't that sign in button? And then waterproofing the tags. Great question. I meant to mention that. So once you print these out, if you have a laminating machine, great. Unfortunately, you do have to cut the tags out first and then laminate each one. You can still kind of arrange them on a laminating sheet, but you do typically want more space in between them. But if you don't have a laminating machine, I mean, what we often do, these tags were actually designed to fit inside that wide packing tape. So you can just take that clear packing tape and then kind of double wrap on both sides so that it's completely sealed, each of these tags, and then punch a little hole on one end, and I usually just twist tie them to a tree. So that's a great question. Okay, let me get back to this and see. Keep those questions coming. These are great because I inevitably forget about things. Oh, here's actually, so there's a PDF document. I'll show you later on where to find it. If you just want to practice using the app, the mobile app, then you can use this test branch, EJR, and the site password for this is just test. It'll ask you that one time, and then after that, it'll remember, oh yeah, you have permission to submit data for this example site, so go for it. And then you never have to do it again. There's also other ways to practice this whole process, which I'll show you in a moment. But so this is just walking through what the mobile app looks like, which I showed you. That's how we characterize leaf length, herbivory. Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about some of those resources now. So a lot of the resources that you can find on our website are in this resources link that's under participate. A lot of other things you'll find under learn. But so just to show you some of the resources here, there's a lot of tips, things for training participants to do this. A document that goes into more detail about setting up a site, that goes into all the information I just went over about how you can manage your site online. Here's the PDF where you can practice, you can walk through using the app on that test branch. Tips if you're going to do this with a class, some tips for instructors. I mentioned the paper data sheets, instructions for building a beat sheet. Some tips for educators, for exploring the data and managing the data, and then a bunch of educator learning activities and things like that that are good for all ages, really. So this is a great resource. But one of the areas that we want people to feel comfortable with, of course, that I alluded to before, is being confidently able to identify bugs to these different levels. So on the learn link, if you go to identification skills, here we have a number of resources. So one of them here's a document that you can, a double-sided document that has photos of some of the most common things that are found on branches. By no means is this everything, but it gives people a sense. So this is something that you could print out double-sided and laminate to hand out to volunteers. It also has a ruler on it to help people with that length estimation. And so on the back, it has just little things to look out for, identification tips for each of those groups. So that's something people could have with them. To practice in advance, there's an arthropod photo quiz. This is one, this takes some photos from iNaturalist. And boy, I can't even see that very well. Is that a bee? I don't know, I'll call it a bee. It was a bee. And it gives a little tip for something to look for. And then you just click the page to move on. Now those guys are flies. I know that because they just have a single pair of wings. And you know, if I get it wrong, I'm like, oh, it's 8 legs, it must be a spider. But actually, no, that's a daddy long legs. They have a single joint. It's called a cephalothorax. That is, their head and body are all kind of, and abdomen are all joined together in one big lump, versus a spider, which has a separate I'm sorry. Spiders have a cephalothorax separated from their abdomen. Daddy long legs, the head, thorax, and abdomen are all lumped together. So you can play this quiz, and every time you play, you'll get a different set of photos. It's not an infinite pool of photos, but you can definitely play this 5 times and see lots of different photos there. So that's one great way to practice your arthropod ID. The other way on that Learn page, on the identification skills page, is a virtual survey game. So this virtual survey game here, you play it. I'm going to go ahead and make it full screen. Okay, well, we have this really easy branch. You can see there's some bugs here. I've got a little magnifying glass. When I click on one, you see we get something that looks like the mobile app, basically. So, oh yeah, that's a spider, and I have to estimate its length, and there's a ruler at the top here in millimeters. And again, I'm just measuring the head and body length, so ignoring those legs. I don't know, I'm going to say 6 millimeters for that guy. Look at that, I got it perfectly. So I say okay, and then it takes me back to the branch where I can hunt some more. There's a caterpillar. I'm going to say 10 for that one. 12, okay. That's okay. I didn't get as many points as I could have, but that's all right. And then there's a fly. And I'll say for that one, I'll say 9. Ah, it's 11. Okay, and I think that's all the bugs on this branch, so I'll click next branch. Because I found whatever I found, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next branches get harder, right? Harder to spot stuff. There's something, I'm going to say it's a grasshopper. Of course, it's not a grasshopper. I'm going to say it's 4. It says, no, it was a true bug. It's actually 5, et cetera, right? So if I think that's it, there's more things here. But if I say that's it, I can see, oh, wait, there's a bunch of stuff that I missed. And go on to the next branch, etc. And I get a final score at the end that tells me how good I am at finding bugs, how good I was at identifying them, and how good I was at estimating length. And you can play this game over as many times as you want. There's several different branch things, but the bugs are always in a random different position. So definitely a great way to practice the activity if you have a group of people. You know, in some scenarios, maybe you have citizen science Saturdays and different people show up every day and they don't even know about the project till they show up. That's totally fine. But for the people who it's like, oh, there are these 6 dedicated people who are really excited to do Caterpillars Count this summer, and they know that in advance, you know, make sure they kind of practice, you know, they can practice their ID and practice the virtual survey game a few times so they feel comfortable with it before they get started. Okay, let's see. I stopped sharing. I think we're That's a great question. Do we want native plants, not invasive species? So, all else equal. So honestly, we're happy for people to set up survey branches on non-native plant species, invasive plants, especially if those are the dominant plants in their understory, in their natural area that they're looking at. I mean, so I'd say, did I just say all else equal? All else equal, we kind of we do prefer native species, and I guess for that reason, if this is a garden environment with lots of ornamental shrubs and things like that, that data is probably less useful for kind of scaling up to understanding patterns across landscapes, because those ornamental shrubs are typically not occurring across wide swaths of landscapes, even though they might be occurring in lots of yards. But if you have a natural area and there's just lots of privet or Russian olive or something like that, and that's one of your dominant understory shrubs, if we want to characterize the resource availability in that area, then it is important to know, okay, well, just how many bugs are there? And in fact, for some places, perhaps you actually have as a motivating question, I really want to do a comparison of what's the difference at my site between the arthropod supported on my native plants versus this handful of invasive plants here. And maybe you even want to strategically choose your branches to answer that question. That is all fine. That's all fine. So we do have plenty of non-native plants in our database, plenty of non-native survey branches that people have chosen to set up. If you have a nice natural wooded area, then native plants are great, but certainly non-native plants are okay. It's perfectly fine, especially if that's like a specific goal of yours, or if that's the only area that you are able to do surveys in. Let me see what else I was going to cover here in my slides. I went through those resources. I went through where you can find stuff. Oh, right, the data visualization tools, and then we'll kind of pause for Q&A. Actually, before I go to the data visualization tools, I'll just mention, so for every participating site at the end of the season, so usually in December, you get an automated report that's generated that has summaries of how many people participated, how many bugs we found, just for fun, a leaderboard that ranks people based on what % of the surveys they did had caterpillars. You get summaries of, here's the seasonal pattern of some different types of bugs that you saw. You get a summary that includes, here's how your site compared to the top 10 sites based on caterpillar occurrence. So you can kind of get a sense of how you compare to others. This is actually just a few snippets from an example site report. You can actually look at all the site reports. They're all available for all sites on our website. But that's something you get at the end of every year. And so that could be something to share with participants, to share with, with people interested just in general in the biodiversity of your site. Okay, so let me go back to the website. The last thing I want to show you on the Explore tab of our website is this Maps and Graphs page. And so this is where you can visualize everything. I mentioned some leaderboards. So this, again, these leaderboards are silly, and just for fun. But by definition, it kind of ranks sites based on the percentage of surveys that have seen a caterpillar. And the default is so far this year. So far, the POHO, which is actually a new site. That's the first time ever seeing that one. That's good to see. 5%. So these numbers are quite low, right? This is also actually a good rationale for doing at least 20 or 30 survey branches, right? Because at 5%, you're only going to see one caterpillar in every 20 branches or so. So So the more branches you survey, the more cool stuff you actually see. Anyway, this stuff is all for fun. You can also change this ranking to see like all time based on all the data, not just this year's data. And you can see, okay, well, there are some sites, and actually a number of sites in Wisconsin have been tremendous caterpillar sites. Like a third of their branches have had caterpillars. I'd say that is definitely the norm. It drops off pretty fast. So I think on average, my guess is probably 10%, 8 to 10% is what you could expect on average that we've seen so far. Anyway, that's just for fun. Here's the actual data, right? So we start with just a map. So this map, you can get a sense of where caterpillar count sites are. And in fact, we have a site way up here in Alberta. Someone created a site in Anchorage. They haven't submitted data for it yet. And these circles are actually color-coded right now in a different shade of green. So the brighter the green, the greater that caterpillar occurrence all time, which basically what we saw on the leaderboard. So here's all these bright green sites in Wisconsin that have lots of caterpillars. Most or a large fraction of their surveys have caterpillars on them, whereas all the dark blue, dark green is a smaller percentage, and you can see that hovering over. You can actually visualize any of the arthropod groups you want. We can change that map to demonstrate spiders, and we can focus only on large spiders that are longer than 20 millimeters. We can zero in on only spiders seen on visual surveys or beat sheet surveys. We can change our metric to density or biomass instead of the percent of surveys. So we can say, what about just large spiders seen in the month of June, for example, right? And you hit apply filters, and our map's going to get recolored. I have no idea. Okay, and actually, oh, look at this. One site in Jordan Lake actually had some large spiders on a beat sheet, but everywhere else it's all this dark green, etc. So you can visualize things on a map. Probably of more interest to a lot of people is visualizing patterns for an individual site. So if you zoom in on a map and click any one of those circles, so the botanical garden, which apparently had 0% large spiders on beat sheets. Okay, we can see here's the site description. We can see an overall summary of the site. This is one we've been doing since 2015. So we have 12,000 surveys that have been done at this site by 43 people. Over time, we've documented this many arthropods and caterpillars. We can look at that. We haven't done any surveys yet this year. I'm barely holding on to into the top 10 for caterpillars found. Percentage-wise, again, that's just for fun. Here's the visualizations we can do for a particular site. The default is here for phenology is going to show that seasonal timing of caterpillar timing and abundance. Importantly, we can compare between different arthropod groups or between different years or sites, whatever. So if we add a new line, for example, let's go back to the first year we ever sampled caterpillars in 2015. Confirm that. You can see, oh yeah, look at that, that's pretty different. So 2015, there was this big peak in mid-June, and that's right around when a lot of migratory birds have chicks in the nest that are trying to fledge. So that seems like it was maybe a good year for them. 2022, not so much. No high peak as high as that, and in fact, the highest peak occurred earlier in the season. That might have been before most of those migrants had chicks at all, really. But we can also, I mean, we can just throw on here, you know, any group from any site from any year. And we can do all these comparisons, right? So that's the phenology panel. Importantly, you can download all of the data underlying these graphs. You can download as a CSV file. The raw data are available as well, which I'm happy to show if people have questions. I showed you some examples of visualizing just the composition, the types of bugs, and the relative amounts of those types of bugs. For the botanical garden, here's what I showed you before was the breakdown by plant species. Except the breakdown I showed you, instead of all the bugs seen on black gum, what are the percents? What I showed you was of all the bugs seen on black gum, or actually was it this one I showed? I think. Yeah, this is what I showed before. Here is the number of bugs per survey branch for each of those different bug types, right? So you can choose. You might decide you want to visualize this in different ways, and this allows you to play around. So there's more you can read to fully understand these different visualizations. Other ways to break things down. How have things been changing? How's the composition of this site? We look at it this way. How's the composition been changing from year to year? Mostly similar, some changes. 2015 was especially high in general. Or maybe do certain months differ from other months? We can break it down that way. So lots of ways to visualize the data there. And then lastly, and again, I showed you examples of the trend visualization. Of course, you can only visualize trend data if you have multiple years of data, but we can compare, how different groups are varying between different sites or between different groups. So caterpillars at Acadia National Park are decreasing in a similar fashion to caterpillars at the Botanical Garden here in North Carolina. On the other hand, I don't know, some other group, I can't remember, did beetles decline? No, beetles have been increasing here, right? So again, you can explore and compare all of those sorts of things. We provide some statistical summaries if that is meaningful to you. Okay. Let's see here. A question about middle schoolers. If middle schoolers are invited, how much can they manipulate enter data? Okay, so let me show you. I have to sign back into my account here. So anyone, if someone signs in with an account, so there's two options. With a school group, you could imagine creating just a school, like creating a Gmail account for your classroom or something that you use to create a class Caterpillars Count account. Or you can create, individuals can create, I believe it's as long as they're over 12 or 13, I can't remember the cutoff. And there's actually a check when you sign in, or when you first create an account, you have to check a box that says you're older than that age. You can't, if you want them to each have their own accounts, they can have that. When they go to, let's say they participate and they submit data, when you go to manage my surveys, this is a tool I haven't talked about yet. You can see, okay, you wouldn't see all that because this is, but you would see, here's the example survey I just submitted, right? You would see the results of what you submitted, and you would have permission, if you submitted that data, you would have permission to go back in and click the little edit button and change any of these numbers. Oh, maybe it was actually only 2 ants, and maybe they were actually 2 millimeters, and I can save those changes, right? And so anyone, this is not true just for students, this is true of anyone participating. You can go and check the manage my surveys, and you can edit your own surveys after the fact, or especially if you realize you made a mistake, you can go back through and fix that mistake. Like, oh, you entered that all as a beetle, but then your teacher later on told you that same bug is actually a leafhopper. So then you can go in and edit that and change it to leafhopper. If you're the teacher and you created the site in the first place, then when you go to manage my surveys, even if you didn't submit these particular surveys, but you will see all the surveys that get submitted for your site. So you would see all of your student surveys. If you're an environmental education, environmental educator, and you created a site at a nature center, then you will see all the surveys that any participants submit at your nature center. And you can kind of check that here, you can clean it, etc. So if you want your middle schoolers to submit data through the website, that's totally fine. They'll be able to do that, and they can do that either through their own accounts or through a classroom account. Both of those would be fine.